USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at USAA.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
The Manage Smarter Show is brought to you by SalesCred, the sales skill building solution that empowers sales teams worldwide to multiply sales opportunities by improving perception, accelerating trust building, and by earning repeat business. Get the best-selling book by C. Lee Smith, download the free mobile app, and now sign up for the SalesCred Masterclasses. Book your session now at salescred.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Lee, you have identified a problem. You think you have something that's a solution, but how do you make it the solution, your solution? And that translates into category design. And that's what we're going to talk about today, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to be talking about some of the hottest topics in technology right now and how that fits into becoming a category king by defining the category yourself, as opposed to letting someone else dictate the rules of the battlefield and you having to play by somebody else's rules.
And boy, do we have an excellent guest today. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're so glad you're here. I'm Audrey Strong, Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I am the president and founder of Sales Fuel.
Okay, up on deck in our batter's box, Kevin Maney, best-selling author, award-winning columnist, and a partner at Category Design Advisors. His critically acclaimed book, Play Bigger: How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets, introduced business to the idea of category design, sold more than 150,000 copies worldwide. And as a founding partner of CDA, Maney has helped leadership teams at hundreds of companies all over the world focus their strategic thinking through category design. And I, as a former award-winning journalist, would like to also share his journalism career with you because it makes mine look like itty bitty teeny weeny. Kevin has been a contributor to Newsweek, Fortune, The Atlantic, Fast Company, CNN, and ABC News, among other media outlets. Also a contributing editor at Conde Nast Portfolio from 2007 to 2009. And get this, for 22 years, columnist, editor, and reporter at USA Today. And I might add, even interviewed Mr. Jeff Bezos very early in the days of Amazon. Kevin, I don't even know where to start with you. You're so amazing. Welcome.
Audrey and Lee, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So I think one of the hot categories that Lee wanted to talk about was artificial intelligence and people sort of carving into that category. But that's fraught with all kinds of peril. So where did you want to start with Silicon Valley? And
we're pretty much in the wild west of that right now.
Yes.
So this is, has a category king been defined in that area yet?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not even sure. I mean, AI is an enabling technology in the sense that the internet or computing. It's I wouldn't even call it a category. I mean, a category is a product or service that solves a particular problem, and so obviously, many companies now are trying to line up and figure out how to use this powerful technology to solve some new problems or solve some old problems in ways that could never be solved before. And that will create brand new and exciting categories. But this idea that there's this enabling tech, I mean, I think of AI as we see it today as like the birth of the internet. I mean, it's an enabling technology that many things are going to get built on.
So what will it be ultimately when it splits into 100 categories? It would be AI applied for writing, AI applied for frozen food industry, AI applied, like super niche.
Or even to think of it another way, it's electricity. I mean, we don't think of there's this electricity applied. I mean, electricity was a transformative technology that changed what many different things can do and created new categories of products and services out of it. And that's what AI is. I mean, it's this era's electricity.
It's AI is a classic case of one of those gradually and then suddenly kind of thing, because we've been all working with AI for a while. And many people didn't even know it. I mean, if you use Grammarly, for example, you've been using AI, you didn't even know it.
Oh yeah.
When I'm driving my Tesla, it's like they've been working on trying to make that car drive itself for years. It's like, and still we're in the gradually phase. It's not happening soon enough for me. And so ChatGPT is getting like all the press and all the buzz and everything like that. So I think that's the suddenly part. But when I think about that, here's my question. It's like, it looked to me like for the longest time that IBM Watson, was poised to be like the king of AI. I mean, I remember, seeing a 60 Minutes report years ago about how they were turning that thing loose to try to come up with cures for cancer using AI and everything like that. Why does nobody talk about them anymore?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's actually something I've been thinking about and talking to some of my old IBM, not colleagues, old IBM connections about, and filtering it through the category design thinking that we do. So, and you're right. I mean, IBM should have been able to own this conversation. And I believe that one of the reasons that it didn't is because it did not create a category. It created a product, and it hoped we would figure out what it works for, what it does, what it means to us. Classic. I mean, in a very simple way, classic category design is thinking outside in, right, and finding the problem in the world that needs to be solved, that hasn't been solved, or that an old problem you can solve in a new way. And defining what that problem is, defining how this new technology can solve that problem, and creating in people's minds this new space, this new thing that I want because, or that I understand society needs because it's so. And IBM went about it the opposite way. It created a product, and
in search of a solution, or in search of a problem.
And in fact, even when it tried to find a problem that Watson would solve, in something like cancer research or something like that, it was a problem that was pretty much hidden from the view from the general public. So people didn't even see it in action. People didn't, and just never established that category. And so, I mean, one thing I would tell your listeners is that it is often a much better strategy to try to sell the category first, and then your product as a solution to that category, rather than going out and saying, "Here's my thing; it's wonderful. Figure out what to do with it." I mean, which is what a lot of companies actually do.
Yeah,
it's like when I go to the hardware store, I look at all that stuff, and I don't have no idea how that works or what to do with it.
Right.
Let me hop on YouTube and figure that out. I don't know.
So that's a good lesson. So in your context of covering tech for so long, and we're all of a certain age, I won't say old, but we're
got the gray hair up here.
Three of us were experienced living pre-internet and post-internet.
Right.
And so is AI right now in like what stage of it in your mind is it? And then I have a follow-up question, but where are we right now?
I honestly, so knowing, that you guys have lived through some of this too, I was, in the middle of writing about and reporting on and writing a book about it and all this stuff in 1993, 94, 95, when the consumer internet was essentially born and exploded. This moment in time feels an awful lot like that. Here's this new technology. It's kind of amazing. It's like magic. What's it going to mean? What's it going to do? Everybody's guessing. I was fortunate. I mean, like total luck. I because of what I've been reporting on at USA Today in the early 90s, I ended up writing a book. My first book was called Mega Media Shakeout. And it was about what happens when all content becomes digital, and it was something that was new, a new idea at the time, and it actually came out in April 1995, and it was the first book that was out that had anything to do with any of this. And it's not.
That's when I launched my first website.
And it's not
to the month and date. Yeah,
the book is no great shakes, this book, but the thing was that I got a taste of. I got invited to boardrooms and to 5,000 person speaking engagement because everybody just was grabbing for anybody who like might know something about what this thing was going to become.
Yeah.
And it feels a lot like that right now.
It reminds me of one of your former employers, and I won't say the name to protect the guilty. But the CEO basically was quoted in one of the trade magazines, the media trade magazines, trashing the internet. I actually have a copy of that just to remind myself of, not to be so quick to judge, but trashing that there'd be no use for the internet, that it was all hype and everything like that. Yeah, because they were old media and they had, quite a business built up with old media, and so they just didn't want to believe it, and lo and behold, or whatever, they've been swallowed by it. I kind of feel the same way as kind of where we're at with AI right now. It's just the tip of the iceberg, but we're getting there. And with that in mind, my follow-up question is, like, are we to a point where government has to start thinking about how to regulate this stuff?
Yes. So the last book that I had published, I have had this writing partnership for like 8 years now with Hemant Taneja, who's the CEO of General Catalyst. And we published a book in early 2022 called Intended Consequences, which is about this idea of responsible innovation and how to, and especially pointed at AI, but we're also inventing a lot of like really powerful technologies right now. Around the corner somewhere is quantum computing, and maybe if we're lucky in 20 or 30 years, there's, fusion energy, and there's a responsibility on government, not only governments, but on companies and investors and inventors themselves, to be responsible in a way we've never had to be before, because this stuff is potentially dangerous and powerful. And I'm not a big fan of what's happened with these early generative internet products, where the opening eyes of the world have just released something on us without really knowing what it's going to do, and not really having any guardrails or taking any responsibility for it. And I think it's dangerous. This whole idea of minimum viable product or whatever else is bullshit, because what can you name another product, another thing in the world, drug companies or car makers or
dynamite
food makers, like is some company that makes food going to release a minimum viable version of food and hope that people don't get sick? I mean, it's crazy how this is not being even putting guardrails around it at all.
Pharmaceutical products without trials.
Yeah,
can you imagine
what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Your colleague wrote in the Washington Post, I love this paragraph and sent it to Lee, and the internet's like this too. It has the capacity and scale to spread all our human failings, disregard civil liberties, perpetuate racism, caste, and inequality. I mean, one need only watch that congressional hearing with General Counsel Gaddy from Twitter to see that, this thing was created and it just mutated into this awful, it just went in a direction that was so wild and unintended. And you like to talk about categories and making sure that as much as you can for your clients, that there are not unintended consequences. And so how do you shape that and try and predict that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's going to be, and I mean, that's a tough question, because it is going to be up to, regulators and policymakers. I mean, they're going to have to figure this out, because obviously the industry is not doing it by itself. Can I want to tell your listeners something, because you were talking about this whole idea of, all these new exploding categories, and something that will be interesting to watch for as all this happens. So one of the works that has influenced a lot about my thinking about how categories work and how to talk to companies about that was this economist named Paul Goroski, Geroski, and he wrote this book called The Evolution of New Markets, and he used big data sets to try to understand the patterns that categories have. I'm going to try to do this without having a graphic in front of me, but try to explain this. Because so he had this very elegant little chart that came out of it that seemed to apply to category after category. And I'm going to use an example that we all live through. So think of smartphones. And so for quite a number of years, there were all of these different smartphones. Like there were Blackberries and there were Nokias and there were Motorola's, whatever. And there's like 5 different operating systems, and in all sorts of different ways they worked. Some had keypads, some didn't, all this kind of stuff, right? So what happens when in these new categories is in the very beginning was just a couple of maybe inventions, and when everybody else sees that this is like, wow, that's really something. One of these days we're all going to have phones in our pockets that can access the internet or whatever. So lots of companies pile in. So if you think of a curve that kind of goes upward as the number of companies that are piling into a new category, all with somewhat different designs and different versions of what that thing is going to be. At the same time as that's happening, if you picture another line that's barely moving along that timeline, and that line represents users. Most of the people who are going to buy into that stuff are pretty much early adopters. And the number of users kind of flatlines during that whole period of time that all these companies are trying all these different designs. So what Gorosky points out is that somewhere down the line, something emerges that he called the dominant design. Now, if you think of the smartphone example, that moment was 2007 when Apple introduced the iPhone. And in that moment, the world pretty much decided, like, that's what a smartphone should be. And so when that moment of dominant design happens, everything coalesces around it. So all of and you can see this, right? What happened, all those smartphone vendors, they all basically either die or they copy the dominant design. Because now every phone you buy from any maker looks exactly like what an iPhone.
Except BlackBerry stuck stubbornly to that damn keyboard.
I loved my BlackBerry.
Look where that got them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I loved my BlackBerry. I liked having a keyboard. Okay, anyway.
So the number of companies dies because the dominant design took over. And that's also when that dominant design thing happens. That's when all of us get comfortable. We believe that this thing is going to be around. This is the version of it. We understand now how it works. And so the number of users takes off. The lines cross. So you asked me before about where we are with, there's a category king or whatever. And basically that dominant design, that's another word for that's the category king. That's the category winner, right? And so my answer to that would be that this whole universe of what's going to happen with AI and the chat GPT kinds of things, whatever, is way over on that left side in that day one. And what we're going to see over the next 4 or 5 years is a million companies piling into there, all trying to do different, versions of trying to solve the same problem with different ways. And while there's going to be a lot of us who want to try these things, for the most part, the public's going to watch and sit on the sidelines until that dominant design emerges as something that really works and solves a problem, and we understand how it works, and that's when we're all going to buy it. So I think we're that good 4, 5, 6 years away from some of these AI categories to truly land on a dominant design and win the broad market, whether it's B2B or B2C.
I have a theory that early on, wherever fear is a big deal, because I remember with the smartphones, you're holding that phone up to your ear, whatever, you're going to get brain cancer.
Right?
It's like, or you're trying to drive an electric car. Okay, well, you can't go more than 100 miles before it runs out of juice. What happens if you're stranded? And now with AI, everyone's kind of fearful of, am I going to lose my job? And so, since we're in that state, if you accept that premise, it's like, how can managers of people move the conversation from fear of losing your job to, hey, how can you use this tool to do your job better, faster, and easier?
Well, that is the conversation that has to happen. In fact, I think there was, here in New York City, the New York public schools banned students from using Chat GPT. And I think that's one of the stupidest decisions ever, because instead what you want to do is teach students what this thing is, what it's good for, how to use it, how not to use it. And because their futures are going to depend on using this stuff. And so, we have to, we have to have that conversation. And by the way, part of that conversation can also be, that this sense of fear over a new technology is as old as the Bible, right? And one of the books I wrote was about Thomas Watson Sr., the guy who built IBM. It was his biography. So I wrote, from basically 1900 to 1956 when he died, this whole period of time when the whole computing industry actually was born. And going back to the 1930s and 40s when the first idea of computers started coming up, people were saying these things are going to take, the same whole thing, take away jobs. It's going to, it's going to ruin, whole industry. And, and we adapt and we move on. It's not the way things have worked in the past. And I'm not sure it's going to not be the way it works in the future.
Do you have any tips for managers who have direct reports and helping get those people to buy in when they're participating in a company that's rolling out a new category or embracing new technology? Is it a professional development opportunity? You try and sign people up for courses? Like, what's the way you think is the best way to get everybody aligned in the mindset?
Well, so when we
what do you tell your clients?
When we work with companies on category design projects, the most important single thing that we produce is something we call a POV, point of view. And, not a very original name for it, but it's, so we go through this whole process with clients and figure out what are they, what is the category they're really creating? What's the problem they're really solving? Why are they the one company in the world that can bring this to the world? And, we go through all that kind of, pull it all out of them. And then we capture it in this maybe 800 word narrative. And the narrative is very structured. It's basically the first half of it is let's really describe the problem to be solved. What's missing in the world that needs to exist that you're going to address? And if we really understand the problem, then the solution side is how does that solution work to solve that problem? Not your product features, not the fact that your dial goes to 11 and somebody else's goes to 10. It's what does any kind of solution need to look like in today's world to solve that problem? And then at the very end, we could say, and here's why we're the company that can, that has the wherewithal, the brains, the culture, whatever, to solve this problem. But if you have this really strong 800 word, 1,000 word narrative that really tells that story and creates the story that the company tells itself, all cultures of all kinds have a story they tell themselves about who they are and why they exist and what is expected of them. So you create this story that the company tells itself, and if it's got alignment from the leadership team and everybody buys in and everybody believes this is what we are, it becomes much easier. And not necessarily going to give that story to every single person, but now you have the language and the story to tell and build that culture around. And we found that it's a very powerful. It tells because of the way that story is structured. The product team can look at it and say, "Now I understand what we're doing. Now I understand our North Star for the product, what we have to build." The sales team can look at it and say, "Now I understand how we're going to talk about this to our potential customers." Even the HR team can look at this and put it in job descriptions and say, "These are the kinds of people we want to lure that understand what this is about, what this culture is about." So I don't think there's, in the experience that I've had, there's no more powerful way to do that than to actually capture that in writing and in a way that has everybody that, is on the leadership team aboard with that thing. Mm-hmm. And then it spreads from there.
It's just look no further than any major religion in the world. They all have stories that share the identity of who they are and why they believe what they believe.
Exactly.
And so it's what's your Bible? What's your story? What's your prophecy? And, to me, I kind of feel like that's kind of what's missing from the newer technology is what's the big revelation from cryptocurrency or with AI or some of these other things? Because I haven't seen where someone could tell one great big story about how this has totally changed the world for the better. I haven't seen it yet.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, crypto. I just keep saying every time I see a headline, I'm like, I don't get it. Listen, if you need category design Advisor is Kevin's firm. And Kevin you'd like people to reach out to you, your Twitter, Maney, and you want people to email you, hit the website up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any of that. Kevin at categorydesignadvisors.com. Pretty straightforward.
We'll put it in the show notes for you.
That sounds good. And if you're in New York City, he has a band, everybody. And tell me the name of the band name again. I love the name of it, but tell me the name of the band.
The band is called Total Blam Blam, which is
Total Blam Blam. I love it.
Which is taken from a David Bowie lyric in the song Suffragette City. We play, once a month or so at some club in New York. So we have a Facebook page. You can look us up and
there you go.
Come out and cheer us on.
What genre of music is that?
It's all basically rock, funk, blues kind of stuff.
Nice.
That sounds great. Well, if you need rock and roll or category design, Kevin's your guy. Kevin, this is great. I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much. So interesting.
A pleasure. Yeah, very fun. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.